Did you ever wonder how Eddie Van Halen's tapping technique sounds so awesome? In this video, I'll show exactly what his tapping techniques are and how he makes them sound so good. We'll learn licks that sound insane but are actually easy enough for almost any level of player to master. But we'll also look at Eddie Van Halen's more advanced tapping licks, which will probably massively level up your playing. And I'll show tabs and diagrams to make everything as easy as possible. This is probably the most famous right-hand tapping lick of all time. This pattern is from the end of Eddie Van Halen's solo Eruption, and if you play a lot of live shows like me, this is a great technique to steal because it's a lot easier than it sounds. Before we get into that, what even is right-hand tapping? To tap a note, you hammer one of your right-hand fingers down behind the fret, and with a bit of distortion and muting the other strings, it should sound like this. Now the tapping section from Eruption has this pattern where it starts with a right-hand tap like this, and then you pull off with the tapping finger, and then you hammer on with the left hand, like this. Tap, pull off, hammer. Tap, pull off, hammer. Tap, pull off, hammer. And then this pattern is repeated, and the three notes that are played on that string in that pattern are moved around. Notice that I'm using the first finger, or my index finger, of my right hand to tap here. But you can also use the middle finger. It's fine to tap with either finger because the sound will be the same. So we have this pattern, but what notes are we playing? Well, the most simple choice would be a minor triad. So if we're in A minor, for instance, we're going to play the A, the root, and the minor third, C, and the fifth, the E. So we got 5, 8, and 12. And this is just an A minor triad. Actually, the start of Eruption is also a minor triad. It just happens to be a C sharp minor triad. So Eddie Van Halen adds a little bit of color by switching to the sixth, like this. You're just moving that tap note up by one. So for our stolen A minor version, that would be switching to 13. You're tapping 12, and then tapping 13. But keeping the left-hand part and the pattern the same. Now the Eruption solo follows this complex chord progression, all while staying with that same pattern, and all on the B string. My favorite part is the climax, where it does this descending part. With this part, we're tapping on the same fret, and we're keeping our left hand in the same shape, but we're moving it down chromatically. Tap, and then again, tap. Now we move the left hand down one fret. And do it twice, and then again, and then again. To steal this in A minor, we transpose it to here. Now let's use some exercises to work on what we've done so far and start stealing it for our own solos. By the way, as always, the backing tracks and tabs for all of these exercises, as well as the final solo for this video, will be free following the link in the description. Now, after more than 4 decades, this next solo is still an absolute goldmine for right-hand tapping technique. And that is Eddie Van Halen's guitar solo on Michael Jackson's Beat It. Let's take a look at this lick right here. Now, this lick starts with the same pattern as before. Tap, pull off, hammer. But then we repeat that same pattern in the same shape on the string below. What's awesome about this lick is he's actually outlining a major 7th chord, which is nice and spicy. And the fact that he's doing it across those 2 strings means that we hear that large interval gap where the note is tapped in 2 different places. This makes it sound even wider and even less kind of predictable to our ears. And he's using this pattern to outline the chord underneath in the song. And then when it switches to the next chord, he outlines that using a wide tapped interval trill, like this. This works so well because it subverts our expectation. If we want to steal this lick for our own solos, of course we can. Just bear in mind that specific chords are being outlined, so it's going to sound best if we are outlining the chords that we're playing over. But it also can sound quite cool if those chords are not there, as long as we're playing in the same key, and the fancy name for that is superimposing the chord. To make sure that we can steal this for our own solos, let's use some exercises now to start getting this under our fingers. But how the hell does Eddie Van Halen play these insane tapping runs that sound so chaotic and random, but also smooth and colorful at the same time? Like this one in Jump. There's a very similar one in Hot for Teacher right here. What the hell is actually going on here? So let's look at a simplified version of this pattern just played on one string. I'm going to start by hammering from nowhere with my pinky finger on fret 8 of the high E string, like this. Next, I'm gonna tap on 12, and now I'm gonna do 3 pull-offs. I'm gonna pull off to 8, to 7, to 5, like this. Then I'm gonna repeat that. Go across the strings with the same pattern. Bear in mind when you're doing this, each time you change a string, you're always leading with that pinky finger. If you wanted this to stay in one place, you could just alternate between 2 strings like this. But what's going on with the note choice here? Because surely this is not conforming to any scale. I like what Joe Satriani says about this.
The odd thing about Eddie is that sometimes he would play stuff that didn't make any musical sense, but made sense in terms of how much fun it was to listen to. You know, there are no rules in music. There's just cause and effect. And I think he understood that more than most people.
I think this lick is a perfect example of what Joe's talking about here. A lot of these notes are minor, but somehow it makes it sound even more awesome. I think this is an element that a lot of great 80s players had that's lost on modern players, which is that they're not as afraid to experiment and trust their ear. So we have this repeating pattern of 5, but Eddie Van Halen uses even more tricks to make it sound even less predictable. First of all, even though he's playing a pattern that repeats every 5 notes, he'll sometimes use a different note division like 4 or 6, and this creates something called syncopation, because the pattern is kind of hidden and it doesn't line up perfectly with the beat. Also, he'll sometimes start a lick with a different pattern, which also kind of masks it and hides that the pattern is there. So for example, he might do... Let's use some exercises to master this pattern. Now let's see how all of the techniques that I've covered in this video sound in the context of a full-length Eddie Van Halen style guitar solo. Here we go. Now, Eddie Van Halen might have invented right-hand tapping as we know it today, but this hugely Van Halen-influenced player took not only right-hand tapping, but many iconic Eddie Van Halen-style techniques to the extreme. So to avoid sounding like a Van Halen copycat, click this video next to steal his guitar techniques too, and start crafting your own style.